Hey, my name is Marco. I love talking about music from an emotional perspective. After a decade on the stage, I was a former professional opera singer. Today we're going to be listening to the Guts theme from Berserk. Now, the thing about Guts, based on my limited reading of the first book of the deluxe edition, is that Guts is a harsh and almost brutal man. There is a sense of no bullshit when we talk about Guts, no peace, and a lot of internal unrest. Curious to hear what this sounds like. You know, so something really gorgeous about this that I will say is just profound is the fact that we basically have a nonstop repetition in the arpeggiation of the chord in the bass hand and the left hand. Boom, boom, ba, da, da, boom, boom, ba, da, da. And to me, that is the sound of being caught in a cycle because we never change out of that. Now we do get this vocalism, but it's actually not dissimilar to that left hand sound. It feels like more of a primal scream almost, but obviously it's a bit subdued. To me, it really feels like the idea behind this is a sense of constant motion. We can never get out of this cycle that we're in. We can never move forward. Despite our really cold and callous exterior, perhaps maybe there's a little bit of sensitivity, especially when we think about that soprano voice and how that soprano voice is leading the dominant melodic pattern here besides this repetitive left hand and right hand as well. It's curious. I want to keep listening. Some accents in the right, almost a counter melody in the right hand, but the left is constant. That is the sound of a man broken by his past and desperate to have someone understand and hear him, despite the fact that he is unable to provide that for himself. He has no ability to self-contain his emotions, self-regulate, and so I think he's looking for someone to lean on to be like, hey, you're okay. It's a really powerful piece. I mean, it's interesting. I'm curious to see if it goes somewhere because right now it tends to be in a pretty repetitive pattern, but I do think that's actually okay because when we think about patterns, we often get stuck in them ourselves and we often have a hard time of moving through and with them. And I find that this is really honest. There's a lot of sensitivity in that, despite the fact that based on what I understand of Guts is ruthless and Guts is a killer and Guts is tenacious and will stop at nothing to make sure that nothing is in his way. And yet this music feels different than what I expect. Now, I haven't gotten very far, so it's hard for me to say, but I do think that this music really feels like it's a cry for help, possibly, especially with the way that where it sits, right? That's a real like outcry. And there's a bit of a dreamy quality in this. You don't think that that's dreamy? I think that's pretty dreamy, but not my singing. But this particular thing is very dreamy, especially with the sopranos, and that leads me to a sense of almost like being asleep or crying out in the night or whatever. And then the vocals there are really fascinating. That upper register crying out is interesting because we start in a middle range, go up to the upper range, and then come back down into the lowest range. And it almost feels like that's will you shut up out there? It almost feels like that's a feeling of peacefulness or trying to contemplation or trying to come to a conclusion. There's a real sense of wanting to be understood in that primality of that scream, if it makes sense. It's definitely repetitive. There's a peacefulness in it, but also an angst, if that makes sense. There's a lot of angst in that, even though it kind of repeats and has this peaceful lilt to a degree. And then it resolves. You know, I do think it's interesting how Guts is a very strong, ferocious guy. And it's almost like Guts is unable to really express himself. Feels misunderstood by society and wants to be understood, or has had to bury his vulnerability and authenticity, and it's something that we experience a lot. I mean, we live in a really difficult time where there's a lot of different things being thrown at us at all the time, and we don't want to appear weak or feel like we're not strong, and I don't know what happens with Guts, and I do hope that his vulnerability sort of comes to the surface and he becomes a bit of a, I don't know, in some sort of a way, a role model, because it's good to be vulnerable and we shouldn't bottle things up. we should find a healthy way to release them. And that can be really challenging. And so this piece feels very emotional, actually, despite the fact that what I've read of Guts, he's, like I said, just ruthless and ferocious. So I'm actually curious to see when this shows up, but I do think that vulnerability is such an important part of this piece, and otherwise it would be pretty repetitive and boring, and it is very repetitive. But what keeps it afloat is that beautiful chant that goes on that feels very both lucid, dreamy, and also very deeply melancholic, nostalgic, emotional, and vulnerable. It's almost like we see within the gooey center of what makes Guts, and I think that's pretty cool. If you like this, feel free to check this out. Feel free to check out the Patreon if you like anime watch-alongs. Feel free to check out more. Feel free to like, subscribe, and as always, thanks a ton, and I'll see you later.